This is the Internet Court of Truth and Lies. And its purpose is if you've got something in the media that you think is the truth or you think it's a lie, then you can bring some other people to what we call enforced moderated dialogue on whether other people think it's true, it's the truth the way you thought it was, or it's a lie the way you thought it was. What we find is that it doesn't take very many jurors. We allow up to 8 jurors. You almost invariably find that somebody very plausibly is thinking of what you think is the truth. They're thinking it may be the truth, but in a completely different way, or it's not the truth, or it's a lie in a completely different way, or it's not a lie. And so what this is great for is for people who want to see how what they believe is taken by other people. And the mechanism is called enforced moderated dialogue. We have 8 juror questions, which are standard, that are configured for any lie or any truth. They're not the best questions for a given truth or lie, but they're based on essentially universal linguistics or universal law. Okay. So, for example, the first 3 questions are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And people complain about that, but that defines truth and lies in court in many countries around the world, not just America. So that's an example of why we pick the questions. The questions are not as important as the fact that the questions are there to keep the dialogue on track on figuring out whether or not what you say other people take as the truth or other people take as. So today I'm the plaintiff. I'm a computational cognitive neuroscientist who's been studying what I've called Mendaciology, or the study of lies. And it's a study of how brains compute on truths and lies. One of the findings of that study is if you want to preserve a democracy, follow George Washington's advice and never vote for, promote, or listen to a divisive liar, because that's the one weak point in any democracy. A democracy can be taken over and turned into a dictatorship by somebody who's willing to divisively lie all the time and set one group of people inside a country against another group of people inside a country. I think most people agree we've seen that. But this is not a new trick. This particular trick's been in place for thousands of years. And in terms of how do you get power and take away other people's, or take away other people's liberty by being a king, the answer is it works. And so George Washington warned against it. In this particular case, I was sitting there saying, how do you tell whether some candidate for office is a divisive liar? How do you tell that he is a liar? Because it may be that you might say all politicians lie, which is not true. You may come up with any of these things that people pass around in order to permit the very thing that George Washington said don't do. And so how do you tell? And one idea was to pass a law. And what the law does is the law says every candidate for public office must answer some questions under penalty of perjury. In other words, he goes to jail if any of his answers are lies. Imagine, for example, that the way this is handled, this is one of 1,000 ways to handle it, but one way to handle it would be every candidate for office must have an announced time where for 1 hour, he or she will answer questions personally and live that are put to him that he has sworn under penalty of perjury that he's giving truthful answers, and he must answer the questions. He can't not answer the question. Then everybody could see, you could go on the internet and watch the YouTube of him answering the questions of any candidate for office in any state, anywhere in the country, and other countries might pick up the same idea. And Brian's correctly pointing out there's a First Amendment issue, which is my argument is that's why there's Fifth Amendment, yeah, incrimination. So he can answer, I will not answer that question on grounds of self-incrimination. But he can't say, I'm not going to answer any questions. Another piece of this is that could be thought about is maybe there's some standard questions. Maybe there's a set of questions that everybody knows they must answer. That's actually an interesting topic. If there's some standard questions that everybody knows they must answer, and then you really do get to whether or not the guy is potentially a liar or divisive liar. For example, one question that might work is if somebody believes that the guy has divisively lied in public, they can ask him the same question that he has already answered in public to see what he says. Do you stand behind this, sir? Okay. It may be that he's got a good excuse or something, whatever, but he has to answer it, or he says, plead the fifth. That's the idea. One of the things I did here was I have a copy, and this is Weems' Life of George Washington, and it's actually the original book that Weems published. Let's see what I paid for it. I paid $11 for his biography, and in that biography, on the front page, you can see it, is the article. Let me bring it up. That's, if you can see it, that is the picture that I have on this Medium article is from the original Weems biography of George Washington. This is what's called a woodcut print. And it was printed by Weems. He was the printer. In this, you hear about why George Washington always told the truth, or how he always told the truth, written by a contemporary biographer who was rector of the Mount Vernon something church where George Washington lived. And Weems wrote this biography while George Washington was still alive and sold this book while he was still alive, farm to farm, house to house, and made his living selling this book and other books that he would write and publish, or one way or the other print and publish. And so you had somebody who wrote these stories, and for some reason people kept buying them. So chances are Weems was not really, he might have been elaborating on some things, and we will never know. And most surely he said some things that were things that he had heard. There were secondhand knowledge and so forth and so on. But people did not say at the time, Weems is lying about the fact that George Washington didn't lie. George Washington was known for his integrity and the fact that he basically told the truth. That's one of the reasons that he was trusted with the first presidency and elected the two terms. So this is the original cherry tree story that Weems wrote. It appears nowhere on the web that I know of except in the book. And so I hand typed from the book the story because the book has ever been turned into a digital version of the book. It might have been by now, but when I was looking at the time, there was no digital other than scans, which is what this thing is. So this is the original story, and you get a sense of what Weems wrote in this thing. And one of the things that I thought to do was I also have a book which my father had in 1925, which is Washington's Farewell Address. And we've already discussed Washington's Farewell Address, but this is him in last week's trial. I mentioned that he had, in the farewell address, he had initially started the farewell address with some platitudes about how he enjoyed being president and thank you very much, I'm retiring now, I quit. And then he says, and by the way, this is my father's handwriting on the pages of the book. Then he says, here perhaps I ought to stop. Now, last week I used George Washington's words to create a summary, but what I'm going to do is say the words he used immediately after saying, here perhaps I ought to stop, where he's saying, but I've got some advice to you if you want to keep your democracy. These are his George Washington's exact words, and you'll hear why George Washington was speaking in a version of English that we don't speak so much anymore, okay, because English drifts as a language. Here perhaps I ought to stop, but a solicitude for your welfare, which cannot end but with my life, and the apprehension of danger natural to that solicitude, urge me on an occasion like the present to offer to your solemn contemplation and to recommend to your frequent review some sentiments which are the result of much reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, which appear to me all important to the permanency of your felicity as a people. And you'll see how I shorten this, because that's how George Washington actually wrote it and how he actually basically spoke. These will be offered to you with the more freedom as you can only see in them the disinterested warnings of a parting friend who can possibly have no personal motive to bias his counsel. This is his farewell address. Nor can I forget, as an encouragement to it, your indulgent reception of my sentiments on a former and not dissimilar occasion. And the farewell address goes on, but the entire farewell address is, if I can do it, that many pages. So it's pretty long, but it's not that long. But you can read it and you read his words and you realize, boy, this guy cares about the truth and cares about explaining why he's telling the truth. So that's so my verdicts on this is, I think that with modern media, there should be a law requiring every candidate for public office to answer questions live on video under penalty of perjury. You got to figure there's a 1 hour session for every candidate. That's where he knows the questions he's going to get. And certainly he can take the fifth, but because he knows he's going to get these questions, he might not lie as much and he might get caught. as a divisive liar, in which case people will see what they got. Is it the truth? I said, yes, I think it's a great idea. It's my idea. Is it the whole truth? I said, no, the detail regarding the exact format of this needs to be worked out. And I'm anything I work out is going to be subject to being torn up. So I try not to. I'm just saying it would be a fun thing to go off and see if we could actually do that. Is it nothing but the truth? I said basically yes. I think it's everything in the article is the truth, including the need for the law, and that's the whole truth. The interesting question, and I don't think it should be handed over to some random people to write it in Congress. I think it should be there should be suggestions, and there's maybe a book of chapters written by people of how you would do the law, and maybe so that everybody could read these ideas or place on the internet where people could submit serious proposals. What's the deceit? I said there's no deceit. It's the truth is intended. The motivation it is to convince people to pass this law. What's the social acceptability? I think it's necessary to the survival of democracy in the U.S. and probably in other places as well, because George Washington, in his farewell address, makes that case very clear. What label would improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie? I put no label needed. So I'm going to go through the jurors in the trial and get 30 or 40 seconds of summarizing your verdict. So juror one.
That's me, Bob. I agreed with it. I do feel like it would be an acceptable topic to discuss because I was reading over the verdicts before the trial started, and I can't remember which juror it was, but they had a good point about that. If aren't all candidates supposed to be truthful in what they're saying, and if
no, there's no law that says they have to tell the truth. No habit that says they have to tell the truth.
I feel like they should.
They don't.
And I think I've said this before in a previous trial we've had. I feel like they should be held accountable and they should be made to be credible, because if they're running our country or any part of our government, we have to look up to them. We're supposed to abide by the rules that they set. But it's not okay for us. I feel like it's not okay for us to be put in jail or whatever, or charged with a fine whenever we do something wrong, but the ones in politics don't do anything wrong. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And that's how it should be for everyone all the way across the board. No one should be above the law.
Yeah. My argument is that there needs to be a 1 hour where he must answer under penalty of perjury and he goes to jail if they can prove that he lied. By having that 1 hour for every candidate, all of a sudden the candidates know for all time they're going to have that 1 hour where they have to answer these questions. And boy, is that going to make them aware that they've got to be careful. I think it is true that most people are put in situations where they have to lie. And so people will not tell the whole truth sometimes. And that's not a bad thing. But a divisive liar, a habitual divisive liar, is what George Washington said, steer clear of.
Yeah, but isn't that why we have the debates, Bob?
No, there's nothing in the debate. The debates are not under perjury.
Why do they fact check them?
They're not under perjury. You can fact check them all you want, and people cannot believe the facts.
Oh.
You go to jail at that hour, you risk a felony going to jail if you lie. And the public stuff that's done today, it's called freedom of speech, and you can lie all you want. And they do. What you want to do is try to watch what George Washington said, given the modern times where we have the ability to do this. Back when George Washington was alive, there was no way you could have a 1 hour session that everybody in America could watch. It's not possible.
Yeah. I was wondering about that. Yeah. And I feel like another thing is just not this group now of politicians that we have, but they need to go back and they need to hold all the people that have been in power accountable for stuff that's happened, because there's so much stuff.
You can't do that. You just because they were not under penalty of perjury, it was allowed. They lied.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want to say. It will have no effect because they'll just continue to lie about it. They'll come up with new lies. That's really exactly what George Washington was. That's the reason he said, I can't stop people from lying. And so this is an indirect way to make it hard for them to lie. And the idea is there's only one session for any given candidate for office, no matter what office it is. There's that one session where he or she has to answer some questions. And we have to have what the questions need to be so that they can be asked. And they know what the questions are going to be. So if they have to say, I won't answer that, I'll take the fifth, they can take the fifth. But that's something that, generally speaking, a politician running for office will never take the fifth. Because the second he takes the fifth, they realize that he's admitting to some criminality. So this 1 hour session is simply saying, you're really, okay, so Brian says wrong. So we'll get to Brian in a second. Juror 2?
In terms of what Natasha said with public officials having or supposed to be telling the truth, I agreed on that, but then you explaining it actually clarified a lot of things. And in terms of my verdicts, I do think it's a good idea. Hopefully, if it's done one day, it should work.
Be an interesting thing if it could be worked out, it would be really neat. So Juror 3?
Yeah, that's me. I think it's a lovely idea. I can't see it actually working, though, because it's just going to devolve into quibbling about what the question means. Or I don't see in an hour, I just don't see information stuff is likely to come out. Question and answer session gives the illusion of being in control. To make a really useful interrogation is lengthy and subtle. And I just don't quite see how it could work in practice. But what did occur to me is a slightly different version of this, which would be a better test of the sincerity of a candidate. Would it be better to pass a law that does not permit a candidate to do anything he did not say he would do when in office?
So I thought of that. And the problem is that we try to do that. But the real problem is that candidates will promise things, and what they mean is they'll make their best effort.
Yeah, but that's up for us to judge, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of these guys say it. They say, I will try to give women their vote or whatever. And they try.
What about like the Senate confirmation hearings and all that stuff that like the judges and things have to go through?
So those have a different purpose. Those are to convince the Senate or the House to vote or not. Those are not questions asked to determine whether the person is a liar for the public. So yeah, so if you watch what I see happening, at least in my own view, is I'll listen to these guys give their testimony and I'll say, this guy's lying. Okay. But what does that count for anything? There needs to be one where, but yes. And so those guys are under oath and under penalty of perjury answering the questions. The other thing is the questions are too open-ended. There's not been a sets of questions that are developed from the point of view of challenging the guy as a divisive liar. I actually know of no situation where I've ever seen a Senate review or a House approving somebody to office. But we don't have that for candidates for office. So the House and the Senate do not approve candidates for office.
Some are appointed by Congress, are they?
Some are, and those are, my argument is those are largely at one level taken care of, but they don't, the questions are completely open-ended that people can ask any question. And they tend to, yes, and some people are discovered and some people are not approved by the House or the Senate for whatever office they're being appointed to. But there's nothing for the public other than they can listen to this and say the guy's a liar or not. And then, of course, there's no, you can't, if I think that a candidate to be promoted to Attorney General is a liar, I can't sue that person for perjury if I hear him being lying to senators, or I can't do anything as a citizen. I just have to listen. But there's no mechanism in place that's, unless the Senate does it, and their job is really to allow the guy or not allow the guy.
Yeah. There's an interesting principle in the UK Parliament in which if you lie to the House, you can get you get completely shafted. You have to go and be demoted. But even that principle is fudged now. You don't really, it doesn't really.
It's actually pretty. So I had spent some time in Parliament with Lord Harry, and I could never get into the House of Commons itself or the House of Lords in session. But I was in the Parliament, and we would have parties and lunches and with all these guys, and they told me that. I remember that was a thing. The House of Lords doesn't do that, but the House of Commons does it.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting thing, and they do try to.
Yeah,
they do. It's a real thing.
And but you can also, you can't be tried for libel or anything in Parliament either.
That applies to the House of Lords too.
Yeah.
Who would know? Okay, so juror 4.
Okay, that's me. I would love to see a list of hypothetical questions that you would put to the candidate.
I think the way you do that is we would have a session, a piece of truth court set aside for exactly that question. We would ask for proposals. And we would give some kind of an award every year to the best proposal of that year, something that would allow people to take it seriously and make proposals. And people could read the proposals that they could read basically all the proposals if we put maybe a 2-page limit on the proposals. And that would be a really interesting thing, because then you would have some hope that eventually somebody would come around and say, this is a good law. We should have this because here's the details. And it's not just coming from one person, it's coming from people who've been coming up with separate proposals that they thought would work. I think it's the questions that would be asked and the answers, because that's how you would do it. The question that I would think is always a good question is, you identify something where you think the guy was divisively lying, you've got him on tape, you've got him in video, and you say, sir, this is a divisive lie from my perspective. Can you explain to me why it's not a divisive lie?
The only thing that I like about the questions you're talking about that's different from those confirmation hearing, other than being open-ended questions, is each person asking the questions puts their personal opinions out there. They campaign is how I think it while they're asking the questions. But these questions you're talking about doing, I would think that they should just state the question and not put a spin on it.
I think that the key is that the questions are known beforehand.
Right.
And the questions are vetted through some process where these questions are tasked to do one thing, which is expose whether this guy's a divisive liar, which is the one thing that George Washington said we can't pass a law to fix. And that liar will find lying always works to get power. And you don't want those guys to have positions of power. It's too dangerous. Juror 5?
Yeah, I'm juror number 5. To lead off with, taking the Fifth Amendment implies guilt. It doesn't affirm it. So it's a double-edged sword because you can't be compelled to testify against yourself. The public perception is if you were telling the truth, you go ahead and just talk. The problem with this is when the question is, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah.
You have to reject the premise of the question, which is the purpose of the Fifth Amendment. Which brings me to the second point, which is what you're describing here is the Senate hearings, except that you have a wider audience. And the enforcement mechanism would have to be the same as it would for any given federal appointee who lies to the Senate. But you would have to also use the word lie in the conventional manner, not in the academic manner, where it can mean almost anything, and instead actual, honest to God's intentional falsehood, the conventional definition of lie.
I think it has to go further. It has to go to where George Washington takes it, which is any lie that divides one group of people from another.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the way
that goes
George
into
Washington defined it.
integrity.
And that's not an academic lie. That is a type of lie that George Washington very clearly said is the one kind of lie that's really bad.
That
Because
goes
it
into
gets you
intent, and you can do it with truth too.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's not really about the lie at that point as much as it is the intent of divisiveness. That's what you're actually punishing. That's what you're actually seeking out.
Yes.
So I'm with you. Anyway,
Brian, I'd love to see your questions. I'd love to see yours. So this would be a fun thing to do, is to actually have a place in truthcourt.net where people could make proposals on questions that might work. And I think what those questions are I think it would be a really interesting thing to find out what people who get serious about it and try to figure it out, what would work and what wouldn't work. Nothing is going to be perfect. It will just not be perfect. Okay. But its job is to basically, we have a weakness in American democracy, which George Washington pointed out, and it succeeds in turning a democracy into an autocracy. Always.
Pretty much. Anyway,
Yep.
I love it. It's good stuff. Thanks a bunch.
Yeah. Juror 6.
That's me. I agree with everything, and I would love to see an elected official lie test. And I also have enjoyed hearing about George Washington.
Yeah. I was going to call it the George Washington test at one time. I actually was in this particular article when I was writing it. It originally was the George Washington liar test. And then I can't remember why, but I changed it to the elected official liar test. Because by then I had read George Washington, and you can tell I'd read his farewell address. Again, you heard me reading the actual farewell address, and I think you saw why it took me over a year to actually believe that I understood every word that he said. Okay. Because so here's another one. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism. By that, he means patriots of liberty. George Washington never thought of patriotism as patriotism to your country. He always said it's patriotism to liberty that he's talking about, to your freedom. More than any appellation derived from local discriminations. So you can see that why it took me a year to read this blasted thing.
Yeah, it's heavy duty.
it's heavy duty and it's really good, but it's unfortunately it's rare that somebody has the time to read something like this, and I fell across it. Can't even remember how I got started on it, but I got started on it. So juror seven's here. Are you seven?
Yeah, I'm number 7.
So what's your summary of your verdict?
Yeah, so what I basically said was that I feel like it should be a thing since it would keep them more accountable for their actions, and they probably like tread more carefully so that they don't spread propaganda and misinformation and things like that. And I feel like it would build public trust, and people could potentially start trusting politicians more, but that's highly doubtful in today's society. But it would be a good idea.
It's, yeah. And so this is, I actually agree with you. I think it'd be interesting to see what concrete suggestions there are for the questions or what would be asked during that hour. The way to pose some definition of the questions to try to make sure that the questions are getting at the one thing that people can see or not see as to whether or not this candidate is a dangerous person to the democracy.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Sorry, real quick. I wanted to let you know I just sent you an email. I asked Grok some things on this, like a few questions, and it gave me a list of questions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I sent you an email with that. I want to let you know.
If you want to, if you just pin to chat, yeah, paste it in the chat. It'd be okay.
It's already there.
Grok is someone we should be asking these questions to.
Absolutely.
I've incorporated Grok.
You know, ChatGPT is a soft version of Grok. You know, it's kind of like more polite. Okay, and Grok is more direct.
Grok can get mean too.
Grok can get mean. Yeah.
When you do the talk section of Grok, she has the hinged tone, and yeah, she scares me.
You can tweak the sentiment gauges on any of these LLMs, and you can change the sentiment, which is basically changing how the words are predicted, okay, by past context and so forth. And most people don't realize that, but they can turn these LLMs into wild personalities. Yeah, you can take with the sentiment controls, and I want to be careful because they have to build these in, and Grok builds them in. But with the sentiment controls, you can do things like answer like an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And Grok it will answer.
A WebMD Grok, like a Dr. Grok.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah.
It's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
That one's pretty accurate.
Yeah, this has all been known for many years that we could do this, and the surfacing. But right now, they try to, for the general use of these LLMs, they try to make them neutral, except for Grok, which has these, they expose some of this. But you can do wild and crazy things with this. You can tell them to only use simple high frequency words.
Yeah.
They will do it, and they will answer the question. Yeah. So juror 8.
Hi there, guys. I do agree with the plaintiff. Politicians often lie or avoid questions, so having them answer both would help people see the truth, in my opinion. That's all I have to say.
I'm 100% with you on that. That's actually, I wish I could say more than that. I agree with you in the sense that it's all I have to say too, because I realize that it really needs to be a process where some place is available where people can put together serious proposals, and then those have to go through people seeing all the ideas for the proposals, and then maybe coming up with some specific good ones or set of questions that you could draw out of that would be the right questions. And yes, I think it's a good idea, but I honestly steer clear of trying to just think that I would know what the right questions are. I can give suggestions, but I don't necessarily, you'd almost have to run this for numbers of years before you would get to the questions that would really work. So it'd be like the Constitution that can be amended. The questions can be amended with experience or with level of the official, because there might be places where people could be elected or promoted where divisive lying is actually a good thing. Okay, so for example, if you were I don't actually know, but back to the same thing. So this sounds great. Are there any other questions about this?
No, I think I'm good on it. I think with your permission, I'd like to run some of the trials through Grok each week just to see what we get as a summary on them. And
one thing that I take out of this is the premium contributors should be able to have a page.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good idea. And another one might be to have one of these, a means. I have friends who I actually have to think about it, but we might be able to get some major entities that are for this. And who those would be, who knows? Any entity you have that would be backing something like this would be suspect. So it might need to be some ground roots type thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like maybe possibly incorporate where we have our dashboard, but have also a sponsor page. It would be a contributing member page, and under it have a short bio stating if we are a moderator, if we are a verified moderator.
Yeah. That's actually good. That gives us a path into this. This is getting interesting. So I'm going to work on getting now we've got a stack of things we're trying to get done from a technical programming point of view, but we're trying to get the sponsor panel up and we've got it defined. I was hoping to have it up by today. We didn't get it up by today. We pretty much defined it. But this idea of having a contributor with a name, and then that brings up a premium contributor that has a page that's just like the sort of what you saw with the sponsor page with that kind
I
of.
think it gives credibility though to those of us that are the moderators that have been here since the start.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think this is a great idea. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just looked at the clock.
Yeah.
We'll see y'all.
All right. And just let me know, Bob. Let me know if you need me to do anything on the back end to help.
Okay.
All right. Bye.